Hey everyone, how's it going? Forrest here, again with another installment of my complete analysis of Bach's chorale harmonizations. Today we're looking at Heil Gott, dich, loben, wir, which translates to, Lord God, we all praise you. This is a pretty straightforward chorale, not too much going on. This is going to be a pretty quick video, but I'll talk about little harmonic intricacies that make this chorale quirky as we get to them. Also, my printer is like on its last leg, so apologies for the ink smudges that might occur on the corners or elsewhere on the page. It's difficult to get a clean copy nowadays, so I need to look into getting my printer repaired. But regardless, no key signature. We start on C, we end on C. We're in good old C major. We then have another C major triad, C, E, G, and C, so no need to reanalyze. Passing tone in the bass before we get E, E, G, and C. That's a first inversion C major triad, so no need to reanalyze, just we'll change the figured bass. Another passing tone in the bass before we get G, D, G, and B. That's a 5 chord. We have a passing seventh in the alto, and the bass leaps down an octave. That's a chord tone, so we don't need to mark it. Then we get a deceptive progression, A, C, E, and A. That's A minor in root position. Passing tone in the bass before we get C, A, E, and A. That's a 6 chord in first inversion. We're seeing some symmetry between the first phrase, or the first measure, and the second measure here, where the chord is being inverted over the beat, the same bass line basically. And then this F is also a passing tone at the same time as this bass passing tone, which doesn't really give us a chord that we can analyze, but nevertheless, kind of implying some type of dominance, I guess, with the leading tone. And then we get C, C, G, E, C, G, and G, that's C major over E, that's our 1/6 chord. Getting ready for our imperfect authentic cadence at the end of our first phrase, we have A, C, E, and C. It's another 6 chord, A minor, E, G, C, and C. That's C major in first inversion, G, G, B, and D. That's a G major triad, which is our 5 chord, and then we have C major, C, E, G, and E, which is our tonic triad in root position. Okay, next phrase, a little bit more interesting, ends in a half cadence, still in the key of C major despite the chromaticism here. Another C major triad here, just a change of voice here in the tenor, so no need to reanalyze. We then have C, C, G, and E. It's another C major triad, no need to reanalyze. Passing tone in the bass, and then we have E, C, G, and E. That's C major in first inversion, so we'll just change the figured bass. Passing tone in the bass again before we get G, B, G, and E. So not G major, but rather E minor in first inversion. That's 3/6. This A is a neighbor tone as well. So we have a similar phrase to how we had, or a similar beginning to our second phrase as we did our first phrase. And then we have 3 going to, depending on how you look at this, I'm going to look at this entire phrase here as an E7 chord over G sharp. So I'm going to call this 5/6 of 6 because E7 is the dominant 7 of A, and A would be expected to be minor in the key of C major. But I think another analysis for this that would be equally as accurate is 7 fully diminished 7th of 6, because G sharp, B, F, and D spells that chord literally on the downbeat, but the fact that E gets referenced later on, and the chord, kind of the harmonic rhythm that we have here is a chord on 1 and then a new chord on 3, kind of indicates that I should be taking into account all of the notes that are happening in the bass here. This F sharp is just a harmonic minor, or sorry, not harmonic minor, melodic minor with the raised 6th and the raised 7th in terms of A minor here, but I don't think we get a modulation. I don't think it's enough because 3 wants to go to 6, typically does, sometimes it goes to 7, but typically goes to 6, and this secondary dominant here is just an additional stepping stone to get there. But regardless, this is some type of secondary dominant, however you choose to analyze it. Call this F an accented non-chord tone as well, based on the way that I analyze. You could say that this is 7/7 of 6, that goes to 5/6 of 6 as well. I think they're both accurate analyses. I'm just going to call the whole thing one large dominant. But regardless, it goes to A minor, A, C, E, and C. That's our 6 chord. passing 7th in the bass, F, C, A, and F. That's F major in root position, which is our 4 chord with another passing 7th in the bass, D, C, A, and F. A little bit of a 2-7 chord going on here, and if we take into account all of the notes that are happening right before this C major triad here, we have G, B, G, and F. That's an incomplete 5-7 chord, but it's missing the note that's the least important in terms of contextualizing the chord, so it doesn't matter too much. That 5-7 resolves to 1, G, C, G, C, C, G, and E, our tonic triad. The chordal 7th does resolve down by step, and then we cadence on 5, G, B, G, and D. It's our dominant. Okay, looking ahead, our next phrase ends in a perfect authentic cadence in the key of C major. We have A, C, E, and C. We might be tempted to call that an A minor chord, but I think this E is an accented non-chord tone. This is actually F sharp diminished over A, which I would consider 7/6 of 5, because F sharp is the leading tone to G, and this is where we would expect the chord to go, which it does. G, B, G, and D, our 5 chord. F natural, which is our passing 7th on the bass. We then get E, B, G, and D. Now, we might be tempted to call this 3-7, like an E minor 7 chord, kind of like a deceptive progression, which I think would be an accurate analysis. But I'm going to say that this E is an accented non-chord tone, and this 5 chord is actually being turned into a 6-4. That's how I hear it, is just with this G major triad on top of it, the E just doesn't really impact it too much. I hear this more as like a big 5 chord. So if I were to attribute a chord to this beat, it would also be G major, and if that were the case, the D would be the bass note, not the E. Regardless, that resolves where we would expect it to, C major, C, C, G, and E, with a passing tone in the bass. C major is our tonic, of course. We then have C, B, G sharp, and E, B, G sharp, and D. That's E7 in root position. That would be 5-7 of 6, just like how we saw earlier here, some type of dominant of 6. We're seeing a lot of A minor tonicization here. And part of the reason that also contributes to this 5 chord kind of looking like a 6-4 is the same reason that this dominant that's happening here operates in a similar fashion. We have E here, or C here, G sharp, D, B, and C. It doesn't really spell a chord, but if you have this B, it does spell a chord, it just doesn't spell a chord. That would really be analyzable using Bach's harmonic vocabulary. B, G sharp, and D. That would be like taking the chord and turning it into a 4-3 chord, but I guess literally speaking, this would be like taking the chord and turning it into G sharp diminished over B. So I'm going to say that the chord is like turning into a 4-3. I think that's totally fine because we have the makings of the chord, except for the root is missing here because this is a 7th chord, so we don't have a doubling of the root. I'm going to call it a 4-3 chord, but I think another accurate analysis would be 7/6 of 6. But when we have 5-7 and 7-7 happening at the same time, really it's just one large dominant gesture, right? And both chords are functioning the same. It's like a static progression where we're really getting this prolonged dissonance. But regardless, it resolves the way we would expect A, C, A, and C. Well, maybe not to that exact spelling, but it resolves where we would expect to A minor, which is our 6th chord. We then have F major, F, C, A, and A, which is our 4 chord, passing tone in the alto, D, D, F, and B. That's B diminished over D, that's 7/6. This E is a passing tone. And then we get another one of these interesting double dominant progressions here, G, D, D, and B, which is our 5 chord. This F is a 7th that surrounds E. D and F enclose E, which is the 3rd of our C major triad, C, C, E, and C, which is our, like I just said, our tonic triad, our 1 chord. And looking ahead, we have, apologies, we have a perfect authentic cadence in the key of C. We would expect a chorale to end in a perfect authentic cadence. First chord of the phrase, we have B, D, G, and G. It's a 5/6 chord, G major over B. That resolves where we would expect C major, C, C, G, and E, which is our tonic triad. Neighboring 7th here before we get another C major triad, C, G, G, and E. No need to reanalyze. A neighbor tone and 2 delayed passing tone, or a passing tone, a delayed neighbor tone, and a delayed passing tone going on. But when we aggregate the rest of the notes, including the ones on the beat, we have B, G, F, and D. It's like a passing 5-6-5 chord, G7, and that goes to C major, E, C, G, and C, which is C major in first inversion. That gets kind of turned back into root position here, but I'm not going to analyze it that way because we would just have an open 5th, and that doesn't really contribute too much to the chord progression. So unlike, did I mark it here? I don't think there were any particular chords here that required analysis in that way, but if you've watched any of my videos in the past, you'll know that sometimes if a chord is fully voiced and the bass leaps down a third and turns it into root position, I'll often analyze it, but in this case we don't have a fully voiced triad, or at least not voiced in a way that you can see all of the notes that would contextualize the chord. The third is an important note when it comes to major and minor triads because it gives you the flavor. Conversely, with diminished and augmented triads, if there's no 5th, we don't know the flavor. We don't know if it's a minor triad or a major triad, respectively. But regardless, we have F, C, A, and D. That's D minor 7 over F, which is 2-6-5. Bach loves 2-6-5 chords. This E is a passing, or sorry, not a passing tone. It's a neighbor tone. We then have F, B, G, and D. Now, one might be able to make the argument that this is a 5-4-2 chord, but similar to a progression we saw yesterday, I think this F is more so just kind of like an accented passing tone, and I think it's actually more likely that this is just a big 5 chord, just because we would expect the chordal 7th, which would be the F in this case, to resolve down by step. So I feel like just there's counterpoint going on, and even though this G is probably the root of this chord, it's happening at the same time as this E in the melody, which undermines the analysis a little bit, but I think we know what's being implied here. So 5-4-2 or 5 in root position, they're both more or less articulating the same thing. Okay, next we move to F major over A, so we have a deceptive progression here, A, C, or sorry, A, C, and F. It's a take or a substitution for a deceptive progression, and when we have a 4-6 chord going to a tonic triad, we know that that's typically connected via the leading tone, bare minimum. Sometimes we see a fully voiced 7th chord or a 5 chord here, but bare minimum we have the leading tone. That's something that's consistent across all chord progressions of 4-6 going to 5 ascending, or 4-6 going to 1 rather, ascending. We have our 1 chord afterwards, C, G, C, and E, root position. We then have G, G, B, and D, which is G major in root position. That's our 5 chord. Passing tone in the alto, before we get another G major chord, G, 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 and D, which is interesting because we remove the 3rd from the chord and create this open 5th. We introduce a delayed passing tone here in the tenor that introduces the chordal 7th, and that resolves down to C major, C, E, G, and C, which is our tonic triad in root position, as we would expect at the end of the chorale, and that is today's analysis. Thank you so much for watching the video and supporting the channel by doing so. If you would like to continue to support the channel, feel free to subscribe and hit the notification icon. I upload once a day and you'll be notified of when my video goes live if you click the notification button. And I'm currently working on Bach right now, like I stated at the beginning of the video, so if you'd like your daily dose of Bach or just some daily dose of analysis, this is the right place to be. Also, thank you for bearing with me today. I'm glad we had a short chorale because I am feeling very under the weather. I'm very sick. I was tempted to skip today because I don't feel that great. You might hear me kind of short of breath, but I was able to get through this chorale. It wasn't too challenging, but yeah, going through the motions of analyzing the chorale definitely took more energy out of me than maybe I feel comfortable with. But regardless, I'm glad we're through it. I'm going to keep my post-chorale notes to a minimum because there really isn't too much to talk about. All the harmonies functioning the way that we would expect. We don't really get a lot of interesting progressions here. There is this dichotomy of major and minor happening kind of interchangeably here. Lots of emphasis on A minor, even though we're in the key of C. But regardless, other than that, I think that this is a pretty straightforward chorale. And I'm going to cap the video off with that. Again, thank you so much for watching the video. Thank you so much for supporting the channel. I look forward to tomorrow's analysis, and I hope you take care.